Hi guys, this is actually my first official, I guess you could say, like video on what the Lord has been teaching me. And I actually want to share with you a word that God has given me. Actually, that was really recent. So the word that God has actually given me to share with y'all is a vulnerability, and how vulnerability is seen sometimes as a weakness, not always as a strength. One thing that I've realized in my life and like what I've experienced is vulnerability also comes with authenticity and realness. A vulnerability with Jesus Christ, then vulnerability with ourselves, and then vulnerability with others. Excuse me. So something that I've been actually really realizing recently is that in our very day and age, we tend to not want to be vulnerable because it shows a weakness, or then we are exposed, and exposure doesn't always feel good. I mean, come on, raise of hands, exposure does not feel good. However, I've learned that exposure actually brings growth. So in my relationship with the Lord, I always thought that I don't need to share things with God because He already knows my heart. He already knows what I'm thinking about. He already knows what I'm going to do. But in reality, we actually are called to share with Him what we're experiencing, what we're going through, what we're feeling, and stuff like that. So recently, as just a normal girl in this world, going about the struggles in life, going about my insecurities, what I need the Lord to take care of in me, I realized that I wasn't being real with myself. And when I wasn't being real with myself, real with others, I wasn't being real with the Lord. So through this, the Lord was like, vulnerability starts with me. If you can't be vulnerable with me, you can't be vulnerable with yourself. You can't be vulnerable with others. And I was like, okay, Lord, I know you're calling me to a whole new level of intimacy with you. I know you're calling me to a whole new level of authenticity and realness. And Lord, I want to get there. So it takes a lot for one to pour out their heart to a person, letting them know like the innermost, deepest parts of their heart. And so I began to pour out my heart to the Father and just say, Father, like, I need help with this. I am weak here. I can't do this myself. How many people, how many of us go through this every day where we can do it ourselves? You know, no big deal. We got it. It's just a little thing. We like to share the big things with the Father, but not a lot of us like to share the little things. And pointing back to this movie, I believe it was The Shack. And when he met God, he was just saying like how she already knows his life. He already knows his life, so why should he tell God? And then the Holy Spirit came in and said, we always enjoy and we crave to hear you talk about your children, and it makes us delight. It delights us to see you talk about your children, even though they already know all about them. And I was allowing this to sink in and resonate with me, and I was asking the Lord, I was like, Lord, even if you already know about me, my deepest wounds, my deepest secrets, my innermost thoughts, my insecurities, my doubts, why do you want to know them? And the Father told me, I want to know them like I know you. And when the Father said that to me, it's such an intimate setting. The Father delights when we bring stuff to Him because it's a two-way street. A friendship is always two-way. A relationship is always two-way. Jesus can't give, and we give nothing in return. So when Jesus gave of Himself, He wants us to give of ourselves. And it just makes intimacy so real in the relationship. And the Lord also said, as you begin to reveal your heart to me, I begin to reveal my heart to you even more. And as I began to be more real and authentic and vulnerable with Him, the Lord had so much more for me to share with Him. The Lord had so much more for Him to share with me, just about revealing His promises and His gifts and His words and His love. And through that, like the connection is made. And so the Father said, how can you be vulnerable with others? How can you be vulnerable with yourself if you're not vulnerable with me? And by doing so, it's by laying at my feet and soaking me in. So I've been doing this recently where I just allow the Father's heart to seep into my heart. And through that, it's by saying things that, like aren't comfortable. That are kind of, ooh, Jesus, are you sure you want me to tell you this? Jesus wants to know every single part about you. And as we have gone out through this world, it's hard to actually allow that sink in, that there's someone that wants to know everything about me without judgment. And Jesus is judgment free. He opens his arms ready to receive you and hold you close and love you. And there is not another person that is like that, like Jesus. So with that, there is not another person that you can be vulnerable with, that you can be open, real, and authentic with, and not be judged, but rather be loved. And so that's what the Father's been teaching me. And in fact, I was reading, and the Lord actually brought me back to the book of Hosea, which is, let me read this to you. I believe it was chapter 11. And it talks about the love that Jesus had for Israel. Israel grew bitter. Israel did not want to open up. Israel was like, I'm doing it my way, not your way. I'm fine. Basically, that's what they were saying. But yet, it says in the first 2 verses, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. The more they were called, the more they went away, and they kept sacrificing to their idols. Well, then it goes back to saying, verse 9, I will not excuse my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. And then verse 10, they shall go after the Lord. He will roar like a lion when he roars. And it talks about in verse 12, Ephraim had surrounded me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit, but Judah still walks with God and is faithful to the Holy One. And it just talks about, even though Israel turned their face away towards God, even though they grew in bitterness, God still loved them. God still pursued them. God still ran after them, because honestly, like that relationship with Israel was more valuable to him than any other thing. And then it goes on to, in chapter 14, it talks about how they returned to the Lord. And it says, verse 2, take with you words and return to the Lord. Take away all iniquity, accept what is good, and we will pay with bulls the vows of our lips. Verse 4, I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned away from them. And then it goes on and on, and it talks about how Israel was vulnerable with the Lord and how they returned and then were given the gift of redemption. And there's many situations actually in the Bible that talk about this. For example, Ruth, how she was vulnerable with the Lord, how she poured out her heart to the Father, and how the Father returned to her with his own heart. And all due to say, vulnerability begins with Christ. And vulnerability, you cannot be vulnerable with yourself and cannot be vulnerable with others until you're vulnerable with your Creator. And I was reading over and I was writing, and I was noticing what vulnerability does. And vulnerability breaks chains. Vulnerability sets people free. Vulnerability crashes walls down. Vulnerability is a response to obedience. And then authenticity clears the air. Authenticity allows others to share. Authenticity breaks the insecurities. And authenticity is real beauty and honesty. And then being real is what truly shines. Being real is trustworthy. Being real is what stands out. Being real is what always will be remembered. And honestly, being real opens one up to a whole new level of you. So in response of these three things that the Lord has called us to, and the Lord has called us to be with him, it's a response to obedience. And it's actually humbling ourselves, embracing our helplessness, knowing that we are weak and that the Lord is strong, And through that, when we respond in obedience and are vulnerable with him, the Lord really reveals his plan for us and reveals his heart. And it actually aligns our heart with his heart, which is purity and innocence. And so through this, with Christ, we are called to be authentic, vulnerable, and real. And through this, the Lord begins to reveal his precious heart to us. And there's nothing that compares to this. So I want to share this word for you. Don't know if it's going to speak to you. I know it's for someone. Any questions, comments, just below. Thank you guys, and I hope you have a blessed day.